I want to know who is to blame for the fall of the Western Roman Empire, and in this video I want to speak about Alaric. In this video I want to go into details about why Alaric invaded in 395. There are two invasions of Alaric. The first one happened in 395 and the second one is going to happen in the 400s. I think that it is important to find out if we know anything about these two invasions. And I am going to quote two people. One is particularly favorable to Alaric, that is going to be Michael Kulikowski. And the second one, I don't think that he is against Alaric, but he doesn't give as much details, or he's not as favorable to Alaric as Michael Kulikowski, and that is going to be Thomas Hodgkin. I quote, "Early in 395, possibly shortly after Theodosius's death, the native officer Alaric mutinied along with the auxiliary unit of Goths he commanded. Not only had his men suffered extraordinary casualties at the Battle of the Frigidus, seemingly as a result of the emperor's deliberately tactical choice, but he was refused the reward he had expected for his service, promotion to a magisterium and the command of regular units. Who is using the Goths to fight? The Roman Empire. Who is letting them die like pigs? The Roman Empire. Who promised Alaric a magisterium if the Goths die like pigs? The Roman Empire. Who broke the promise to Alaric? The Roman Empire. Who didn't give Alaric the promised magisterium? The Roman Empire. What people die like pigs in the Battle of the Frigidus? The Goths. Who didn't receive what was promised to him? Alaric. What people would be pissed for not receiving what they deserve? The Goths. Who would be pissed after not receiving what he deserved after seeing how his men die like pigs? Alaric. This is why I have empathy for Alaric. He got effed over by the Roman government, and there's only one thing that the Romans would listen to, which is a revolt. Let's keep reading. That was a consequence of the strange status of the 382 settlers, unlike commanders of barbarian origin recruited directly into the elite units of the comitatenses or the Palatine domestici. The settlers of 382 were trapped permanently in the inferior status of auxiliary troops, what were not yet, but would soon be, called foederati, foederates. Who were considered inferior units? The Goths. What people were trapped in the inferior status of auxiliary troops? The Goths. What people are willing to die like pigs to get out of the inferior status of auxiliary units? The Goths. What people actually die like pigs to get out of the inferior status of auxiliary units? The Goths. What people die at the Battle of the Frigidus? The Goths. What people are getting effed over by the Roman Empire? The Goths. This is why it's so difficult for me to empathize with the Romans at this particular time, because they are playing with fire, they are abusing these people, and they think that they can get away with it. And in the other hand, I empathize with the Goths. Let's keep reading. The mutinous Alaric now marched on Constantinople under arms, and began to negotiate with Rufinus, who might have intended to use him as a counter against Stilicho. All sources blame Rufinus for authorizing Alaric to plunder the Balkan provinces, but his kernel is certainly a retrospective blackening of Rufinus's memory. Similar things were alleged about Stilicho after the latter's fall. More likely, Rufinus refused to negotiate because Constantinople itself was basically impregnable. And so, Alaric's followers were forced to live on plunder. Who is being used by the Romans? Alaric, who has seen extraordinary casualties for nothing. Alaric, who is pissed at the Romans. Alaric, who is marching at Constantinople. Alaric, who didn't reward Alaric properly. Rufinus, who is refusing to negotiate with Alaric. Rufinus, who thinks that he is safe in Constantinople. Rufinus, whose fault it is that Alaric is in the Balkans. Rufinus, whose fault it is that Alaric invaded in 395. Rufinus. It is very difficult for me to try to justify why the Romans were in the right and why Alaric is in the wrong. Alaric is being used and then he's not being compensated. That would piss me off as well, and I would march on Rome if that was the case. So call me a barbarian lover, but I don't think that Alaric is unreasonable in this case. Let's keep reading. Stilicho used that as an excuse to march into the Balkans, ostensibly to suppress Alaric, but no doubt also to threaten Rufinus. So basically, Rufinus screws over the Goths, and maybe even more precisely he screws Alaric, and then Stilicho tries to fix what's going on in the Eastern Roman Empire. But this is not well received in the Eastern Roman Empire. Alaric actually is promoted to what he wanted, so basically Rufino gives Alaric what he wanted, which is the position of Magister Militum, and then tells Stilicho to get out, to F off. But I'm getting ahead of myself. But that is what Michael Kulikowski had to say. Let's see what Thomas Hodgkin has to say. I quote, "What is important for us in their bearing on the relationships between the two ministers, Stilicho and Rufinus, the latter, Rufinus, is accused and with too great a concurrence of testimony to allow us to reject it as a mere fabrication of his enemies, of having actually invited Alaric to invade his master's dominions, or at any rate of having smoothed Alaric's passage into Greece in order to remove him from his too menacing neighborhood to Constantinople." Here Thomas Hodgkin differs a little bit on the opinion of Michael Kulikowski. So Kulikowski says, the plundering of the Balkans is just a result of these failed negotiations. Meanwhile, Thomas Hodgkin, he relies more on what the sources say, and he says, well, actually Rufinus is the one who invited Alaric in. But as we can see, you can either believe what Thomas Hodgkin is saying, which align with the old sources that he is using, or you can see it from the perspective of Michael Kulikowski, who is just explaining, well, that doesn't make sense. Probably it's just a blackening of the reputation of Rufinus after he died, which to me, the justification of Michael Kulikowski makes more sense. But that's up to you to decide. In the same way that Thomas Hodgkin is up to him to interpret those things. But in any case, let's take this particular account at face value. Who invited Alaric to plunder Greece? Rufinus. Who facilitated Alaric to plunder Greece? Rufinus. Who was afraid of Alaric? Rufinus. Who wanted Alaric far away from Constantinople? Rufinus. Who wanted Alaric attacking Greece rather than Constantinople? Rufinus. In this case, who can we blame for the first invasion of Alaric? Rufinus. Whether you take what Michael Kulikowski is saying or what Thomas Hodgkin is saying, whether you take one or the other, it is clear that to me, it is clear that there is mismanagement. That whatever is going on, the people on the top are not dealing with this situation like they should. In other words, they are incompetent. Let's keep reading. He, Rufinus, was jealous of the overshadowing power of Stilicho. He was too conscious of his own intense unpopularity with all classes. Even the dumb loyalty of his master was beginning to fail him. A scheme which he had planned for marrying Arcadius to his daughter had failed, and on the night of the wedding the chamberlain Eutropius had brought with dance and song a fair young Frankish maiden to the imperial palace instead of the daughter of Rufinus. The beautiful barbarian who assumed the name of Eudoxia was now putting forth all her arts to mold the plastic soul of her husband into hostility to his chief minister. Surrounded by so many dangers, Rufinus seems to have conceived the desperate idea of playing off one barbarian against another, of saving himself from the Vandal Stilicho by means of Alaric the Goth. Who is growing desperate? Rufinus. Who knows that Alaric is a good military man? Rufinus. Who hates how much influence Stilicho has? Rufinus. Who wants to keep using Alaric? Rufinus. Again, it is very difficult for me to empathize with these people, the people who are running the Roman government, when they seem to be just power hungry. They are playing stupid games with fire, and I find it very, very difficult to try to empathize with them. Let's keep reading. Stilicho, who still commanded the greater part of the united force of both empires, had come up with the Goths, and was on the point of giving battle when letters arrived from Constantinople, subscribed by the hand of Arcadius, commanding him to desist from further persecution of the war, to withdraw the legions of Honorius within the limits of the Western Empire, and to send the other half of the army straight to Constantinople. Who had the biggest army in the Roman world? Stilicho. Who attacked Alaric? Stilicho. Who is willing to get rid of Alaric? Stilicho. Who controls the Western and the Eastern Roman army? Stilicho. Who is willing to become the undisputed master of the Roman army, Stilicho. Who is afraid of Stilicho's influence on the Roman army, the Eastern Roman Empire? Who is afraid on the way that Stilicho moves into Greece, the Eastern Roman Empire? Who is seeing that Alaric is going to be destroyed, the Eastern Roman Empire? Who is seeing that the first invasion of Alaric is going to be the last one, the Eastern Roman Empire? Who wants to protect Alaric from Stilicho, the Eastern Roman Empire? Who protected Alaric from certain destruction? The Eastern Roman Empire. This is why it is so difficult for me to put the whole blame of the fall of the Western Roman Empire on Alaric or just the barbarians, because we can clearly see that if the Romans, if the East and the West join forces together, they could easily have gotten rid of Alaric, and maybe not only Alaric, but any other invasion of the barbarians. Were the barbarians really a threat? It is clear that one of the men who received the greatest blames on the fall of the Western Roman Empire is actually defended by the Eastern Roman Empire. Let's keep reading. This infatuated decree, which can only be explained by the suspicion that Arcadius had really been persuaded of the disloyalty of Stilicho and feared the rebel more than the barbarian, had been wrung from the emperor by the cajolery and menace of Rufinus. The first invasion of Alaric is interesting. It happened because Alaric was not compensated with the things that he was promised. It happened because Rufinus didn't want to negotiate. Or it could have happened because Rufinus was willing to see Greece being plundered but not Constantinople. The first invasion of Alaric could have been the last one. Stilicho could have ended Alaric, but the Eastern Roman Empire saved him. To me, one thing is certain. Alaric is not just a barbarian who wanted to conquer Rome. That is just a misunderstanding of what is going on or what was happening during that time. But maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm crazy. I just want to know who is to blame for the fall of the Western Roman Empire. In the next video, I'm going to see what happened next to Alaric, to Rufinus, and see what's going on with Stilicho.